This is a fascinating conversation. Joining us now is a guy who knows real estate from the bottom up. Investor, made millions of dollars understanding market trends. Tens of thousands of people tune to him to find out what he has to say. His latest expertise, he's bottled this, pandemic investing. It's actually, I think, called pandemic investment. We welcome Jason Hartman. By the way, just to be completely honest, I've kind of become a fan. I've been watching his videos, seeing what he has to say, even listen to his podcast a little bit. I want to tackle two things with you, Jason. First is there a looming crisis? Number two, what will be the big trend that comes out of this? Let's start with the crisis first.
Rick, great question. It's good to be here. And the circumstances in some ways are very dire. And the question when it comes to real estate is what type of real estate and where. There are three basic types of real estate markets in the entire world: linear, cyclical, and hybrid markets. The cyclical markets, meaning the expensive markets around the country, South Florida, close to where I live, the West Coast of the United States, the expensive northeastern markets, they are in for trouble, especially if they are high-density markets. Because I predict, Rick, that there will be a mass migration away from high-density markets to low-density suburban markets. I think we are going to see a major rise, a resurgence in suburban living. And
I guess, if I can fill in the rest of the enthymeme here, two reasons. A, people can work from home because they don't want to be in elevators surrounded by other people. And B, the new technology allows it to happen.
Right. And the interesting thing about that, Rick, is that the technology isn't that new. We've been able to do this for quite a while, as you know. But now everybody's been forced to use Skype and Zoom and GoToMeeting and all these tools. A crisis always pushes people. You know, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And now many more people, have been forced to work from home, and they realize they can do it. So the home is becoming the center of the universe, as it should be. The city is not as necessary as it used to be.
I was listening to your podcast over the weekend as I was driving from D.C. to Baltimore, and you were the most interesting thing to listen to at the time. And you kept saying
thank
something.
you.
You kept saying something which was interesting. Well, there's no more sports. You kept saying, stay calm. The most important thing is stay calm. And yet, the things that you and I are talking about are not the kind of things that make people stay calm. How do you balance those two?
That's a great question. There are a lot of people suffering. This too will pass.
But will I lose my house? Will I lose my investments? Will I ever work again? These are the things people are thinking about. Maybe not you and I, but some of the folks watching us, Jace.
Understood. Unfortunately, we are galloping towards socialism. We are galloping toward a more centralized control of our lives. The government, the Federal Reserve are coming to the rescue. They have been bold, unbelievably bold in the amount of money they are pumping into the system. There will be more. This is an absolutely historic time.
Helicopter money.
It's truly incredible what's happening.
Helicopter
money.
Helicopter money. It just keeps coming, and nobody knows where it's like magical money, right?
Yep. Hey, listen, when you have the reserve currency of the world and the biggest military in the world to make sure you keep it that way, you can pretty much do what you want. And I know everybody says the dollar will collapse and so forth. Right now, the dollar has gained a lot of strength because everybody around the world is sucking up dollars in order to fulfill obligations and to buy commodities like gold. We are in uncharted territory. It's a very interesting time.
So it's almost like we're in a butt-kicking contest and everybody else is out of two legs, but at least we still have one, right?
Good point. It's not that I agree philosophically with any of the stuff that's going on, as I didn't during the last crisis, but the U.S. is the cleanest dirty shirt in the laundry, as the saying goes.
Well said. You're a great guest, Jason. Thanks so much. We appreciate having you on. Here's really the big story, right? The big takeaway, the COVID-19 pandemic and its subsequent impact on the global economy, followed by the racial unrest that is now taking place and will have an effect on housing. Now, you hear a lot about the stock market and how it's up or it's down because of all these developments that we've experienced. But the stock market, look, it affects for about 10% of all Americans and less than 2% of all of the people on earth. But you know what does affect all people? Housing. Because one way or another, we all need a roof over our heads. So we thought this was the topic that we should drill down on. Joining us now, Jason Hartman, who knows housing, by the way, from the inside out. He's an extremely successful real estate investor who connects with thousands of people weekly on jasonhartman.com, where he shares some of his insight with others, and he's here to do it for us right now. All right, Jason, let's start with this. First, have these times that we've been going through with the economic situation, the pandemics, et cetera, have they caused home prices to go down?
Well, Rick, thanks for having me back. It's counterintuitive, but the exact opposite has occurred. Now, when we look at home prices and talk about this stuff, virtually all of the statistics, any of us here, are national statistics. And as you know, the housing market in the country, like as large as the United States, obviously there are so many markets. It's a huge country, about 400 local markets, if you will, that can really be divided into three categories: linear, cyclical, and hybrid. So to answer your question, expensive housing markets were already suffering before the pandemic. There were already lots of stories about expensive properties in New York City, in Los Angeles, even in less expensive markets like Seattle, certainly San Francisco, South Florida, Miami area, Boston, Washington, D.C. to a lesser extent, because that's got the government that skews the stats. Mm-hmm. Those were already suffering before the pandemic. But interestingly, now we are seeing this mass migration out of high density areas, and the housing market, by and large, is up. There's very little inventory and lots of demand.
So let's call it the burbs, for lack of a better term, as we've always referred to it here in America. If you live in the suburbs and you have a home and you're hunkering down in it, keep it. Don't sell it, because the value you have in your home is pretty much the value you have right now as a person, right? I mean, monetarily, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, the suburbs, I think those homes are going to do very well through this. Actually, I think if you own suburban properties now, keep them, because there is a tidal wave of people moving in your direction that want to be out of high density areas. They don't want to take mass transit. They don't want to get into elevators. If you live in a condo complex that is in a suburban style city that is 4 stories or less, you're probably okay. But if you live in anything that's considered mid-rise, which is 5 stories and up, or high-rise, 12 stories and up, I would really be concerned about properties like that. And, you know, we're now already witnessing the second wave of infection. And you alluded to the racial strife and the riots. And, you know, that's just one more reason not to live in cities.
Let me ask you a question, though, because everything that you're saying, although conflictive with what we would think is going on, may make some sense if you consider that there's a lot of money out there. I mean, the government's been pouring money. One of the things it's done is something called forbearance, which I learned from you originally, by the way, which is where they will tell you you don't have to pay your mortgage for the next 3 months, 6 months, some even a year. Okay, so let's suppose that's the reason that everything is still stable and nothing has imploded or exploded. But what happens when that forbearance program ends, when the government stops the gravy train, so to speak? Is that when we'll see the problem?
Yeah, very good question. And the real answer is none of us know. None of us know, because the economy has a lot of challenges ahead. I mean, we still have massive unemployment. You know, to use a phrase we've all become familiar with relating to the virus, the curve has flattened in terms of unemployment. Still, things are pretty sketchy out there. And these forbearance programs, you know, it's still unclear, Rick, as to whether or not that's a layaway program, if there might be some forgiveness, or if it will just be tacked on to the back of the loan, or what the workout is going to be at the end of these forbearance periods that are 3, 6, or 12 months. And, you know, this is what the government does. They always distort every market because they come in with aid and bailouts and stimulus, and it just distorts things, and it makes it hard for any of us to know what's really going on. So To some degree, it's definitely a guess, but I would say for sure, low-priced housing, necessity-oriented housing in suburban markets where people can socially distance, where they feel safe, where they're not in cities that are having riots and civil unrest, and they're not taking elevators and mass transit where they might, catch a virus. Those are a pretty safe bet, because the other thing that's happened during this whole thing is everybody's really realized that the home is the center of the universe.
Yeah. And
since so many people are working at home now, they actually need a larger home. They need more space. So instead of living in that $4,000 a month, 600 square foot condo or apartment in New York City, for $1,500, they can get a 12 to 1,500 square foot suburban house with a yard and a 2-car garage in a nice community, and they're already working at home. So what's the difference if it's 10 miles away or 100 miles away or 1,000 miles away? It's all the same.
You tell it so well. Wow. Jason Hartman, a guy who's made millions and millions of dollars in real estate, and he started as a kid investing in real estate, and we're just so glad to be able to have him on to take us through these explanations, because they do make sense. We'll follow to see, and hopefully we'll be able to have a conversation again. Thanks so much, Jason. Always appreciate it, my friend.
Thanks, Rick.
Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is The News with Rick Sanchez.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and I want to welcome all of you who are watching us from all over the world, and including those of you who are watching on your mobile phones using the portable TV app. 3 major American banks are stockpiling money over fears the coronavirus recession could get even worse. Let me tell you who they are. JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Citigroup have all set aside almost $30 billion that they say is going to be there to try and cover loan payments that Americans are increasingly unable to make. Those loans include credit card debt that Americans aren't making, business loans, mortgages in forbearance that are sometimes being delayed, in some cases up to a year, that people are telling their banks, look, I'm not going to be able to pay my mortgage for at least 6 months, in some cases a year, depending on the bank, depending on the terms. Joining us now to talk about this is Jason Hartman. Jason is the founder and the CEO of Platinum Properties Investment Network. He's also a very prolific investor in his own right. I guess the takeaway here, Jason, is that banks are looking like they're getting stingy with their money and about to become even more stingy down the line. Am I reading this properly?
Yes, Rick. During the Great Recession, everybody blamed the banks for being too liberal in their lending guidelines and giving out a bunch of liar's loans and ninja loans, meaning, no income, no job, doesn't matter, right? And so now the banks are being more conservative. There's no question about it. Even as they have stockpiled between the 3 big banks that you mentioned, about $28 billion, we are seeing mortgage applications for both purchases and refinances go through the roof. I mean, consumers, homeowners and home buyers cannot resist these low rates. It's causing an artificial boom in the housing market. And there's a lot of repositioning, as we talked about when I was on with you prior, people moving to the suburbs. But one of my fears is that we'll see what we had seen happen after the Great Recession, or even during, is this, this kind of vicious circle, this cause and effect, where the banks overcorrect. On one side of the pendulum, it swings back and forth, right? They're too liberal, and then they become overly conservative, and then that hurts the housing market, hurts the economy overall. So that's one of the things we need to be mindful of, is that let's hope they don't overcorrect. It is good that they're being careful, for sure, but overcorrection is just as bad.
Let me take you in a different and interesting direction that conflicts somewhat with what you just postulated and with what a lot of people are saying and fearing. And that is that so many people out there are going to owe so much money, and they're taking all this stimulus money, but in many cases they don't have jobs, and they're not going to be able to pay down their mortgages. Oh my God, the sky is falling, and that means that eventually we're going to have one hell of a bad economy, right? Okay, Let's go in a different direction. And suppose that all these people are actually not idiots, and because the government is putting money in their pockets, they're able to use it in a wise way and help boost our economy down the road. Is this pie in the sky, or is there a possibility that this could happen as well?
No, it's a very interesting point you raise, Rick, because the basis of wealth for the individual, the family, or the society is capital formation. And what a lot of people are doing right now, although we don't have any very detailed statistics on this yet, but a lot of people are using their unemployment money, their bonus unemployment. They may not really be unemployed. A lot of people are gig workers and you kind of can't tell. They have their own business. It's very hard to really know. And what they're doing is they're not paying their housing payment. They're not paying rent. They're not paying their mortgage. They're in a forbearance program and they're stockpiling cash. So interestingly, these are strange times we're in. Some people are actually going to come out of this pretty darn well, even if you'd think they have a hardship, because it might show up that they're on a forbearance program or they're living in an apartment and not paying rent or getting a reduced rent or getting some sort of loan workout on a mortgage, either side, renter or homeowner. But they're using that to save money because they're living in their house for free or at a reduced price.
So you're saying that by them stockpiling this cash, what we could actually have is the opposite of what many are predicting, that we could have either a big or small boom economy somewhere in the near future.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to tell. I'd say that as far as the pandemic goes, we're probably in the third inning, okay?
Yeah.
So it's still early. We're in the third inning, and we've got a ways to go. The economy is definitely in trouble. There's no question about that. But there are definitely some bright signs. I talked about before, there's a shortage of supply in housing, automobiles, a lot of consumer products. So this is the supply-demand shock that we talked about on a prior show.
Great stuff, as usual. Jason Hartman joining us to talk about some of the things that may be happening from an on-the-ground perspective, which is where he lives, by the way, which is not theory or thesis, but actually what's going on pragmatically. Thanks again, Jason.
Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is The News with Rick Sanchez.
Joining us now is one of the most prolific real estate investors with years of experience in this field. Jason Hartman from jasonhartman.com is where you can find him. Joins us now to talk about this. This is a classic argument, Jason. I mean, should the government leave well enough alone and let the market make the determination? Or should they get in there and say, no, sorry, you're not allowed to collect rents? And what's the effect on the poor guy who wants to collect rent because that's what he lives off of?
Yeah, it's a great question, Rick. I don't think the government should get involved. I'm a believer in the market, and I think the market can work things out. Sometimes it's slow, it's not perfect, but I think it's better than government intervention. However, we have what we have. Now, the CDC moratorium, the National Apartment Association is suing over that one, and we have these in different places. But remember, all real estate is local, and some of the jurisdictions vary quite a bit from others. So in these landlord-unfriendly markets, the left-wing type of environments like New York City, where Trinity just reported from, that's going to be a tough slog there, in addition to all of the other challenges New York City is facing. In many parts of the country, this is kind of a non-problem. A lot of people are talking about it, but it just doesn't seem to really be something that's ending up as a problem for very many landlords at all.
Last time you and I spoke, we talked about the fact that people were actually going out there and buying more houses, while at the same time people were leaving big cities. So we've got this map that I want to put up, and I want to share it with our audience, and then I want you to react to it. This is about the bubble possibilities, right? This is where the bubbles might burst and who has the highest chances of having a bubble burst. Chicago, interestingly enough, very low, negative 0.66. Vancouver, 137. This is North America. Toronto, the highest at 196. LA, 1.16. And then New York is only at 0.56. Explain to our viewers what this means and why Chicago is so low and Toronto so high.
Right. Rick, Chicago is actually a very low-priced, what I'll call trophy city. I know Chicago is not without its problems, believe me, and the state of Illinois has its problems. But as far as a city that is sort of a world-class city, if you will, if someone's visiting from Europe and they're visiting the U.S. back when people used to travel, you remember, they'll go to L.A., San Francisco, New York, and what's on the list next? It's probably Chicago. And Chicago is a very inexpensive city. All of those other cities are very expensive. So that's the reason it gets some slack on that.
So the more expensive you are, the more likely you are that you're going to have a bubble then, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Housing overall, when you look at median price housing, it's actually cheaper on an inflation-adjusted monthly payment perspective because the interest rates are low, and we've had some inflation since 2006. A house today is about $650 a month cheaper than it was in 2006.
That's amazing. That is amazing the way that thing is working right now. Thanks so much, Jason. Thanks so much, as usual, for joining us and sharing the information with you. JasonHartman.com. Thanks.
So it's a great pleasure to bring to you someone who is usually interviewing other people, and he kind of softly promised he wouldn't be interviewing me today because I'm interviewing him. And that is none other than the great Rick Sanchez. You know who he is. You've seen him on RT News. And what I love about Rick's segments and his philosophy toward media, which we'll explore today a little bit, but I think this is his philosophy. Maybe I'm speaking for him, but he's a bit of a maverick. He really believes in something called news. I know that may sound like an outrageous thing in today's world because it's so agenda driven and everything's so politicized. Where have all the journalists gone? I mean, it is especially the investigative journalists. So it's really great to have him on the show today. Rick, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's funny. I should probably let our audience know if they're not familiar with the fact that I've had you on my show a couple of times.
Yep.
Because I see you kind of as the consummate expert economically, but specifically in real estate, and not just theory of real estate, but actually working it with your own hands from the ground up. And that's what I think is so cool. That's why, I'm just wondering, I don't know if we've tackled this question when we've been on the air on the news with Rick Sanchez, where we're now getting upwards of millions of people tuning in, because it is very different from anything offered here in the United States.
And we're going to go into that. I got to ask you all about that.
It really is a fascinating concept, what's happening with news nowadays. But let me ask you something that's dear and near to your heart, and that is this uptick, this surprising revelation of people buying homes up the wazoo.
Yeah.
And if they're doing it in such a way that's not going to cause a huge backlash down the road, like I'm thinking people worry about delinquencies in the car business and in other kinds of businesses where people have to take out loans. What's going to happen when people don't have money in their pockets? What's going to happen if the unemployment doesn't come down? Are you worried about that? Should we be?
A little bit. Now, you promised you wouldn't interview me, and you're already doing it. It's a habit. I can tell. But, definitely a little bit. And like I've probably conveyed on your show, Rick, and I've done on the podcast before. I know you listen to the podcast, but and thank you for listening. It depends where and in what price range. I think this necessity housing is going to be fine through all this. But let me tell you, I think all of us 3 months ago, we thought the world was ending. I mean, nobody knew what to expect. Three months ago, I said on my podcast, and people couldn't believe I said it. I said, if you are a new investor who's just saved up, the money to buy your first 2 or 3 properties, we don't want your money. Just wait. It's not gonna, if you wait 2 or 3 months to see how this thing pans out a little bit, it'll be okay. Just don't do anything because we were very unsure. And, what I think this is proving, this sort of artificial boom in the economy and the stock market. Number one, it's a very uneven situation. Some people are really struggling. Others aren't. Others are doing very well. It's a very mixed kind of thing, but also the whole economy, not only of the US, of the entire world, is built on a house of cards.
Yeah.
It is fake, okay? And I think we're all getting the sense now that no matter what happens, I mean, we got this sense during the Great Recession, that the government and the Fed is going to come in and just fix it all, which is probably a dangerous idea.
If in the end we do have a downturn, does it really matter to the average real estate investor as long as he has butts in seats, as they like to say?
Yeah.
As long as there are still people who need to be living in homes and they need to rent anyway.
Yeah,
right.
I think you're right. Look at in the type of housing that we invest in, you catch people moving up or down the economic ladder or just staying in one place, right? So we may well see, and we saw this during the Great Recession, Rick, where 2008 to 2010, 11 period, we saw people that had been foreclosed on. They used to live in a bigger house. They used to live in a nicer neighborhood. They used to send their kids to private school. Now they're renting a basic house for $1,400 a month, and they're sending their kids to public school. Okay, so things change. But the nice thing is, in this basic necessity housing, you're going to catch people moving down the ladder or moving up. Either way, you're good. In the high end, that's a different story. In the very low end, like those D-class properties, I don't know. I guess you'll always have a poor class, sadly. But when times are good, the rising tide does float a lot of boats. I can't say it floats all, but some of those people move up, and some of those areas even become more blighted. So I think the area, the kind of part of the market we're in, is pretty safe.
So the answer is, if there is a situation where the well runs dry, so to speak, there will still be people out there who are going to need housing, and most of them, in other words, the trajectory of buyers vis-a-vis renters might change. In a down economy, there may be more renters than buyers, but that doesn't really affect the real estate investor,
right?
Does it?
Right. Well, it doesn't affect the investor who is truly an investor. And for those of you just listening to audio, I'm doing quotes with my fingers, because an investor invests for yield. They invest for cash flow. Whereas a speculator invests, well, they don't invest, they speculate, they gamble for appreciation. And I teach one concept I call the 3 dimensions of real estate. And what you find is that in a so-called boom cycle, and most people consider a good, quote, real estate market to be a seller's market, meaning it's easy to sell properties. You put them on the market, you've got 10 buyers knocking down your door to buy the property. That's what most people call a good market, okay? But is that really true? It depends what your perspective is, right? Maybe a buyer's market is better, right? Maybe, seller's market is better. Maybe the in-between market that I like to call a broker's market is better, because I find it very hard to operate in a really hot market like we have now. And we've had that for quite a few years, because there's very little inventory and it's very hard to please buyers right now, okay? But what happens that you basically were stating is that the amount of people in the renter pool stay there. They can't move into the buyer pool because they can't qualify for a loan. Maybe interest rates are too high, housing affordability is too low, or they have bad credit. And so whatever this is, they can't buy. So that puts upward pressure on rents. And investors who already have a portfolio, they like that. That's a good market for a landlord. So that would be another type of market, a landlord's market, right? Yeah. And actually, usually very low interest rates like we have now spur a seller's market, which is also what we have, right? So low interest rates make it easier for renters to become buyers. And that's not as good for landlords. If you already own your portfolio and say you have 50 units or 100 units or whatever, and you're going to welcome higher interest rates. You've got super low interest rate loans that can't be duplicated, okay? And Renters are not buying because it's too hard to qualify for a high interest rate loan. So that puts you in a pretty darn good position where your rents are going up and you just sit tight and collect the rents. It's great.
That's fascinating. And that's what happens when you put years into something like this, like you have, and you come up with a pro forma that's formulaic. And it doesn't matter what the situation is. In the final analysis, the program works. You just have to plug it in a little different way, perhaps.
Right. Right. You have to adapt your strategy. You know, sometimes you're in a strategy where things are going up, 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 and that's like a capital gains market. Sometimes you're in a dividend market, meaning a cash flow market, mostly, where you're just collecting your cash flow. And that's great. Either way, you know, you can make money either way. Okay. Yeah.
Cool
good stuff. All right. Are you ready to talk about the media?
Let's do that.
Okay.
I know a little bit about it, just a little bit.
A little bit. So first of all, how long have you been in the news business?
Oh, my goodness. When I was going to school at the University of Minnesota, where I had, interestingly enough, gotten there, I graduated in Miami, Hialeah High School. I was a pretty good football player, and I got a football scholarship. Poor kid, refugee, immigrant from Cuba. My parents barely made $10,000 a year combined income.
When did your parents leave Cuba, by the way? There's an interesting story right there.
1960.
Yeah. So a year after Fidel took over in
right as Fidel was taking over, they smelled that there was something totalitarian or wrong or communistic.
They got out just in time. You know, I was in Cuba about 15 years ago, maybe. Fascinating place, really fascinating. But
so go. My parents made the decision they didn't want their children to grow up there. We ended up leaving the island. I went to Miami, where I grew up as a regular American kid whose mom and dad did not speak English. How could they? They came very late in their lives.
Sure.
I graduated from high school, got a scholarship to go to Minnesota to play football because I was a pretty good student, pretty good football player. And then suddenly a professor tapped me on the shoulder and said, you know, you're a pretty smart kid. You look pretty good. CBS News is offering a scholarship, 3 in the entire nation. It's probably going to be 10,000 people who apply, but I want to recommend you because I think you got what it takes. So my God, lo and behold, I applied and they done picked me. They did.
Fantastic. So you went to work for CBS and you were probably a reporter at first, right? In the field?
Yeah, I started off through the University of Minnesota. Then I graduated from the University of Minnesota. I was just a punk kid trying to learn journalism. But when I graduated, there weren't a lot of people in the United States who spoke perfect Spanish and perfect English. And since I was educated in the Midwest, my English was flat. It was Midwestern. So that worked to my advantage. And in Miami, they were looking for people like me. And I ended up getting a job right out of college, and a pretty good one. And then I just kind of worked my way up. I went from working for NBC in Miami to then working for NBC National. I worked for CNN. I worked for Fox News. I worked for Univision in Spanish.
Oh, wow.
And now I work for RT America, which is a global situation, which is very different. So I've worked or had a show and had some of the highest ratings, thank God, in some of the biggest networks in the United States, including my show, Rick's List at CNN, which was the highest rated show there.
Fantastic. That's excellent. And so when did you start at RT?
2018, October. So that's about 2 years now.
And they recruited you from CNN?
No, it's funny. CNN had fired me, which happens a lot in our business. You know, in our business, it's a lot like being a manager in baseball or a head coach in football. You know, you just you get fired, you go on to the next one. And, you know, the good thing is they usually pay pretty well. So you can make a pretty good salary, but then you get on your fanny from time to time. When CNN had let me go, something interesting happened. And I think people who are watching us, maybe this may be a heuristic experience that we can all learn from, because we always wonder, what is our worth? What is our value? And in my situation, Jace, when I got knocked out at CNN, I still had 4 mouths to feed, and I had a wife and the 4 kids, and I had to figure out what I was going to do in my life. So I went back to Miami, and the first thing I did is I said, well, I'm still a broadcaster, so I can do radio, which I did, but it wasn't enough money. So I have to do television. So I did television in Spanish at an independent station, and it still wasn't enough money. Fox News couldn't make me a full-fledged anchor or reporter at the time, but they gave me a contributor gig, which still kind of wasn't enough money. But when I combined the money from Fox News and the money from, radio and the money from the other gig, I was able to come close to what I was making at CNN.
Mm-hmm.
So now, but I was working my ass off.
Right. You were basically working 3 gigs.
3 gigs. And
Yeah.
let me tell you, that's a lot of work, and it's really, really hard. But while I was doing that, what I learned was the principles of advertising. And let me tell you why. So I had a gig on the radio where a radio station said, oh my God, we have Rick Sanchez. So they would go to advertisers and say, we have Rick Sanchez. How'd you like to have Rick Sanchez do your commercials? We could rent you Rick Sanchez's voice. That's the way advertising works. So I noticed that the radio station was doing very well with my product, my name, my brand. The television station was doing very well with my product, my name, my brand. And so was Fox, distributing me the way they were. And I started thinking to myself, it's funny. I'm renting myself out to all these people. What if I owned that brand? You know where I'm going here. Mm-hmm. So I knew at the time in Miami, the hottest industry was healthcare. Miami attracts a lot of older people.
Right.
Healthcare is a real commodity there. So realizing that there were doctors that were looking to do advertising, because the only way to make money in healthcare is to have a good marketing plan. Mm-hmm. And I realized that if I got together with some doctors, and here's the cool story. I got together with some doctors. I knew there was a lot of money to be made in managed care, healthcare, where you take care of people who are 65 and need a really good doctor or provider program. I got together with some doctors and I said, look, let's go to an advertiser, a media company, and say that we're working together. We'll create a television show for them. Mm-hmm. And we'll take half the inventory of the show. In other words, Jason, and for everybody listening at home, if you're getting a half-hour show, let's say there's 3 minutes of commercials on there. Mm-hmm. We want 1.5 minutes of them every night where we get to put our spots. So suffice it to say, I traded with them to do that. So we had my brand. I owned a piece of the company that I was negotiating for to go in there and take the show. And then we were able to do a show. I got a salary, but more importantly, I had a piece of the product. And I was able to do that through this wonderful company called Cano Health. Mm-hmm. Would you believe, Jason, that 4 years later, that company is now ranked by Inc. magazine as the #1 fastest growing healthcare company in America?
Yeah. And I would believe it because I already found that out because I looked them up after talking to you about it before, but the listeners don't know that. So go ahead.
It's exciting. It's exciting to know that in your life, when you get knocked down and you have to start all over again, if you reach deep inside yourself, you can find the skill level. You just have to apply it in a different arena. That's all. And people don't realize that. They think, well, all I know how to do is this. No. Just because that's what you did doesn't mean that's all you know how to do.
And Rick, maybe the lesson for everybody listening is, look, we're going through a very uneven time, obviously, in the economy with all that's going on. It's crazy. And, things change during these times. Creative destruction happens. People get fired. Companies go out of business. Changes happen. And, being able to adapt to that. And, how many stories have we all heard about how someone got fired and it was the best thing that ever happened to them, although they didn't feel that way that day, right? They felt, oh God, the world is over. But then it turns out to be a blessing in disguise, right?
That's exactly what happens. And, I would never have thought that day when I was fired and I was sitting in my closet at night crying because I didn't want my wife and my kids to see me that way. I never in my life imagined that I would go on to start a company that's worth, probably over $1 billion. And that is now, I'm I'm almost in an investor status where I'm a very, very wealthy guy. It's like, I'm embarrassed saying it.
Congratulations. That's the American dream.
Yeah.
From one generation, poor people leaving Cuba, right? And here you go. So that's right there is the American dream, folks. Could that have happened in many other countries. It could have happened.
Certainly not in Cuba.
Yeah, well, certainly not in Cuba, that's for sure. Unless you were with the government and you were on the inside, right?
Yeah.
That's the one small group that gets that.
Yes, or an
Rick,
Olympic
that's a great story. Talk to us about the media business and the media landscape. And here's what I'm thinking. First of all, I've been following RT News for, I don't know, 12 years now or something, maybe 10 years. And it's kind of weird. Here's, the Russian government is actually an investor in this company. Yeah. Okay. So they exert, I guess, some form of editorial control. But, the news stories are fantastic. I mean, they cover, I read their stuff on my, see my dog, on my iPhone app. And, there you go. Yeah. We're both showing dog pictures for those of you who aren't watching, dogs and families. I mean, it's some of the best news stories out there. You don't get this stuff on CNN. This is like kind of counterintuitive.
I see where you're going with that. And I understand you're bewildered, as I kind of am in many ways.
It's bewildering. That's the right word.
Yeah, it is. I do not trust RT to tell me what's going on in Russia. I just don't trust them. I think somehow they're going to be influenced.
Right.
Like in many ways, I don't trust the BBC, who is also, an institution kind of owned by the government as well.
Yeah, right.
And I have a feeling whenever they do a story about Hong Kong, it's always anti-China and pro-Britain. Well, of course, Hong Kong used to belong to you, and now you sound like you're jealous.
Yeah,
but
right.
Whatever. We could go into all kinds of take stories one at a time and delineate what it is about them that makes the communicator bias. Fine. For some reason, when I say I wouldn't trust RT to give me all my information about Russia, I don't trust CNN or MSNBC or Fox or any U.S. channel and some newspapers when they give me information about the United States.
Oh, I mean, I don't think anybody will disagree on either side of the political aisle. I mean, the mainstream news media has gone off the rails.
Yeah, they have.
It's insane. And, you probably know about this, but the New York Times has closed its offices and told all its journalists in quotes, to go work out of the house. So guess what they're going to see? They're going to sit on the internet and see all the things that are the echo chamber of what they already believe. And that's basically going to be stories from this formerly venerable institution. The New York Times years ago was this amazing company. That they're not investigating anything.
There's a lot of reasons for that, though. And first of all, I will defend the honor of most journalists who are real journalists. I also understand, and there, by the way, are very few real journalists left because most of the people on television. Not besmirching any of these people. I'm not besmirching Tucker Carlson. I'm not besmirching Cuomo or Rachel or Anderson or any of these people. The great majority of them are not hired because they're journalists. A true journalist is someone who has cut their teeth covering stories, researching stories, picking up the phone, calling people. Tell me about this. Tell me about that. Explain that to me, like I have done with you while I'm sitting here in this office preparing my newscast.
Right.
A journalist is not somebody who has a television show on some cable network who they hand scripts to, and he has 42 writers who prepare his material, and then he goes out there and puts on makeup and just starts reading.
Yeah.
Nobody writes my copy. I write my own damn copy here at RT.
And I know that to be true because you interviewed me 3 times, and 2 of those times you sent me a write-up right off your own computer from your email address before the interview and said, what do you think of these things and these talking points? And, this is what I want to dive into today. So, yeah, I know.
But those guys, and at the same time, if I were one of those persons that I just named and I was making $5, $6, $7, $8 million a year, which is what they're paid,
right?
Because there's so few of those positions, they want to take care of them. I don't want to use the word bribe, but let's just say that they are influenced heavily by a salary that makes them then not ask the questions that in the old days journalists used to ask.
Right.
And journalism has also changed in this way. There is more control now from the outside. Look, it used to be, Jason, I'll be straight with you. In the old days, there was some guy in Miami or in Wichita or in Kansas City who owned the local newspaper.
Mhm.
And he owned the local radio station, and he owned the local television station. That's no longer the case. It's not one guy with the
Yeah.
pride of his community.
It's all corporatized.
It's this giant conglomerates who owns your company and pays everything. And the salespeople in the old days, if they walked into a newsroom in the old days and started spouting off about what they think our coverage should be or why we need to do a story on this or that,
No way.
they would have kicked their ass.
Yeah.
Literally,
Yeah.
they would have kicked their ass.
There was a real divide between advertising and news.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
The New York Times is influenced by their advertisers. They're
Sure.
influenced by Verizon. The people who sit on the board of the New York Times, the people who sit on the board of CNN or Time Warner, the people who sit on the board of all Disney, all these major media companies. There's something called interlocking going on in our society. You know that term. It's a business school term. It means that a guy on the board of one company, let's just say Raytheon, a guy who makes money on missiles, sits on the board of a company that does news.
How convenient.
Suddenly you're doing news stories promoting a war. Why?
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
so, and I'm just using that.
And pharmaceutical industry is another great example. I mean,
exactly.
yeah.
I mean, so when people say to me, my God, you're working in RT and they have Russian influence, I say, you're working at CNN or you're working wherever you're working.
Right.
And let's talk about your influence. Let's talk about who really makes the decisions about what comes out, because I'm sick and tired, Jason, of watching newscasts that do nothing but talk about the latest Trump tweet and the latest Trump faux pas and why he's good and why he's bad,
Right.
while there are things going on in the world. Today, I did an interview with the ambassador from Iran, and I asked him 7 or 8 pointed questions about what they're doing to foment terrorism, about what happened with Soleimani. The day before, I had talked to the ambassador, I think you remember, I don't know if you were on that show, the ambassador from Saudi Arabia, and I hammered him. And I do stories about what's going on in the South China Sea, where World War III could pop up.
Is about to go. Yeah, right.
And damn it to hell, nobody's talking about these things on those other channels. It's the same crap every day.
Yeah.
So pardon me for getting passionate.
Yeah. You really asked the ambassador from Iran or the Iranian ambassador to the U.S.?
The Iranian ambassador to America came on my show live today.
And you asked him, what are you doing to foment terrorism?
Why
Seriously?
are you fomenting terrorism?
Oh my God, that's a tough question. You wouldn't hear that from some CNN quack.
No, I mean, but you know what? He respects me more for it. And that's because that's what I'm supposed to do. You know,
Right. Yeah.
Or beat anybody up. Or
You know,
be
Rick,
Trump or anti-Trump.
hearing you talk about this stuff, the word that comes to my mind, and I love investigative journalism. I mean, that is like my passion, that and consumer advocacy. You know, I grew up watching a show in LA called Fight Back with David Horowitz.
Yeah.
And I used to love to watch that guy. He was a consumer advocate, and he used to go out there and expose all these scams, you know, person getting ripped off at the auto repair shop or whatever it was. And I thought that guy was the best. That was journalism, you know? And the word that comes to my mind when you talk about this stuff is the word grit. You know, a journalist used to be gritty. Yeah. Like they would stand up against the evils of the establishment, right? They would expose the charlatan and the scammer and the church doing wrong deeds or whatever it was, the government doing, payoffs. And I mean, that's all but gone, isn't it?
Yeah, that's why guys like me get fired all the time, because at the end of the day, you got to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and fight for whatever you believe the truth is, and be as transparent as possible in sharing with your audience how you got there. Yeah. And they may disagree. There may be sometimes you're going to get it wrong. I'm highly imperfect. I'm a huge screw up. Yeah. But you know what? If you go in every day thinking, I'm going to try and find out what actually is going on, I'm going to dig, I'm going to question, I'm going to try and fill every minute of my time before I go on the air, trying to find out what the story is really all about. And then I'm going to present it. At the end of the day, that's what we do. We tell stories. We are, and in television, we are the theater of facts. The theater of facts. Think about that. We have to you still have to put on a show. You still have to go on here and say, good evening, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez. Today we have found out such and such, and I can't wait to share this with you, blah, blah, blah. So I am, to a certain extent, performing my facts.
Right.
Damn it to hell, it better be factual, it better be real, and don't BS me, you know?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. You know, one area of life that has become so corrupted also is the area of, and this is kind of a sideline, but the area of awards, you know, like the Nobel Prize, or, and what I want to ask you about is one of my favorites, the Pulitzer Prize. You know, that's an investigative journalist award, right? Have those become kind of just watered down and political, where they're giving them to people? I mean, you look at what goes on in like Hollywood, even with the Academy Awards. Not that I have any respect for Hollywood.
It's funny you say that, because look, obviously I'm a capitalist, right? I believe in the free market and I defend it, but I do believe that we do get to a point in our own capitalistic society. I guess this is where it turns into maybe crony capitalism, where people can amass so much power and wealth that they start to buy, just like they buy politicians and senators and congressmen today, they can also buy. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. So there's these organizations like the Hispanic American Journalists Association, the Black American Journalists Association. Every organization has their own group, right? Well, these organizations are essentially paid, right, to promote the welfare of that group. Guys with Blue Shirts Journalists Association. Wearing a blue shirt.
There won't be a White Guys Association, though. I'll tell you that much.
Right.
That'll never happen.
Whatever the association is, and it may be, and that's fine. People should have association or groupings, but here's the problem with those associations, okay? So the Hispanic American Association, who you think is going to defend and go after CNN, for example, or MSNBC, or Fox, or whoever.
Right.
Fox writes them a check for $200,000 to make sure that they don't go after them. And guess what? They don't go after them. When Lou Dobbs was in a lot of trouble at CNN because he was saying some things that I frankly wish he hadn't said, and Lou's my friend, and the Hispanic American Association of Journalists was going to do something against him, I was there. CNN wrote a check to the organization. Suddenly they had him as their guest speaker. So it's like, this is
ridiculous.
Do some of these groups get influenced? Yeah, unfortunately, they do, and I've seen it with my own eyes.
Yeah, it's just like, Deep Throat from Watergate, right? Follow the money. Exactly. Follow the money. You know, that's what makes the world go round, and there's influence everywhere you look. It's absolutely crazy.
The only thing that I think is a little different for me now, when I told you I was running this company in Miami, and the company was doing very well. Cano Health, it's a great company, and I was there were three of us. One was the CEO, the other one was the chief medical officer, and I was the chief marketing officer. And then I got a call from an agent in California, and he said, there's these guys looking for you. They want you back in the business to go back and do television, national or global in this case. Jason, I said, no, I don't want to get back in. There's no way. I don't want to get back in. And then I came up here and I talked to him. And when I felt like I had an opportunity to produce a show with true journalistic independence, where I get to choose the stories and talk about the things that matter,
right,
and not be interfered with. And when I felt like they made that commitment to me, and I never looked back, I took the opportunity, and it's been a lot of fun doing the stories that nobody else is doing.
That's awesome. That's really good. So where's the news business going, Rick? Maybe we'll just kind of wrap it up with a little discussion on this. Is there any hope for real journalism to come back? I mean, I do like the thing that you have all these small independent outlets nowadays. That's good, but the social media platforms are censoring everybody like crazy. This is an Orwellian dystopian world we live in. I don't know what to think of it.
Find a way to communicate their message. And I think it'll be up to us as consumers, as news consumers, to be able to find the difference. I think we're going into uncharted territory, though. And you're a guy who studies trends, right? There's nobody watching CNN or Fox or MSNBC or CBS or ABC or name your damn channel under the age of 45. There's barely anybody watching under the age of 55. And most are over the age of 60 or 70. So what happens to this new generation? How are they going to consume news? Where are they going to get their news? They're not going to get it in terrestrial stations. So the streaming, the places on our phones, this is where it's going to live. And let us just hope that the principles, the ethics that guys like I learned by going to a real journalism school at the University of Minnesota, where these things were pounded into you. Let's just hope that those people have some of those core principles, because without them, in the end, we're lost, whether we're talking about real estate or business or journalism or anything else. Right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Rick, do you have anything you want to share, like a website or a Twitter handle or anything like that?
No, I do a show every night. It's called The News with Rick Sanchez.
Yep, and it's great.
You can watch it on RT America, or these days we've established something that we just started called Portable TV. Portable TV, to answer your question earlier about what's coming up in the future, is a place where you can go to get the news, and you can do so automatically. It's an app. And in the future, people are going to get their news from apps. And it's pretty cool that we just started this app, and it's blowing up. So it's kind of
good. Good stuff. Good to hear. So how does someone find that? Do they look up Portable TV, literally, or do they look up RT?
Download the Portable TV app, and you'll see Rick Sanchez. His ugly mug all over the place.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, Rick Sanchez, thanks for keeping journalism alive, what's left of it. And let's hope it comes back. And we appreciate your contribution to that. Take care.
And I appreciate yours, Jason. You're a good guy. I like you. Thank you very much.
Likewise. Thanks.
See you, buddy.